Johnny Jackman was a soldier who served with the 9th Kentucky Infantry in the Confederate Army. The taste of action that many of the Kentuckians so desired finally came to them in 2 days of bloody battle at Shiloh on April 6th and April 7th, 1862. None were prepared for what they encountered. March 30th. Being Sunday morning, the boys are rubbing up for inspection to be at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Drill in camp. Am not well. Evening. Heavy firing of artillery in the direction of the Tennessee. First hostile guns heard. The firing lasted some time and made me feel devilish as the deep thunder came rolling over the hills. All on the qui-vive to know the cause. The company ordered to be ready to march at 5 in the morning. March 31st. The company, with 2 others from the regiment, marched at 5 in the morning. Was not able to go. The cannonading yesterday was at Eastport on the Tennessee River. It was caused by our scouts firing into a Federal gunboat, which then shelled the shore. Our camp is in a pine hill near Burnsville, Mississippi, which is a small village on the Memphis and Charleston Railroad. April 1st. The company came in at noon, had been on a foraging expedition, saw where the shelling took place. At 9 in the evening, ordered to cook 2 days' rations and be ready to move at a moment's notice. April 2nd. This season, her gentleness seems tardy in robing old earth in a mantle of green. However, she has commenced work. The forests are greening and the flowers blooming. These remind me of happier days. All quiet in the military line. April 3rd. Through the day, drew and cooked up 3 days' rations and 40 rounds issued to the man. After dark, the regiment was drawn up before the colonel's tent and a battle order read. April 4th. Had reveille at 4 and marched at daylight. Nearly all the baggage was sent to Corinth by a direct road. We had to strike tents and load baggage in a pelting rain. Being weak and debilitated and feeling like a stimulant, I picked up a bottle in which I thought was whiskey, but upon turning it up and taking a big horn, I found it to be alcohol and camphor mixed, medicine for the professor's rheumatism. I thought the stuff would burn me up. It cut blood out of my throat. That taught me a lesson. At the outset, our road led through a swamp, where in some places the mud and water was knee-deep every step. The rain continued to pour down all the forenoon. I soon regretted that I had started. For a time I kept up, but soon the column commenced creeping past me. While the troops would be resting, I would be walking to overtake them. About noon, our road led over piney ridges, and the sun came out very hot. Once I stopped off on the side of the road at a spring to rest. While resting, some soldier took my nice mini rifle, which I had left leaning against a tree, and left his old flintlock in its place. I was vexed. When I got back on the road, I found the division, commanded by General Breckinridge, the only troops on that road, had all passed and the wagon train was moving by. I gave up walking any farther and got into our surgeon's wagon. At sundown, we passed through Farmington, 4 miles from Corinth. Night soon overtook us, and as the road often led over creeks, which were swampy, the train had to stop before coming up with the column. That night, it rained, and James Hunter and I slept in a wagon. I had a high fever that night. April 5th. This morning, I felt completely broken down. The wagon was so heavily loaded, and behind, too, I had to try it afoot again. The train rolled past me, and I was left a complete straggler. A staff officer in charge of the rear ordered me back to Corinth, but as soon as he was gone, I kept ahead. The next house I came to, I stopped. The lady gave me some milk and bread to eat. I felt so bad, I thought I would go no further. Soldiers were straggling along all day. That evening there was some artillery firing toward Shiloh. Again, I had a fever that night. April 6th. This day will long be remembered. Soon after the sun had risen, the firing of artillery became so general, and the roar of musketry could be heard so distinctly, I knew the battle had commenced. I wished to be on the field, but was not able to walk so far. The gentleman with whom I was staying had his only remaining horse caught, which I mounted. When I bade mine hostess good-bye, she looked very sorrowful, which affected me not a little, and I never knew why she took such an interest in me. The gentleman walked and kept up. 4 miles brought us to Monterey, and just beyond we met some of the wounded on foot, with their arms and heads bound up in bloody bandages, and I felt then that I was getting in the vicinity of warfare. Soon we met ambulances and wagons loaded with wounded, and I could hear the poor fellows groaning and shrieking as they were being jolted over the rough road. Met a man on horseback with a stand of captured colors. We were now in proximity to the fighting, and we met crowds of men, some crippling along, wounded in the legs or about the body. Others, no blood could be seen about their persons, yet all seemed bent on getting away. I now dismounted and started on foot. I never saw the gentleman afterwards, who had kindly brought me so far on the road. Being in so much excitement, I became stronger. I met a fellow dressed in a suit of butternut jeans, who was limping, but I do not believe was scratched. He asked me in that whining way, "Has Ewens been in the fight yet?" I thought he meant some general, and asked my brown interrogator what troops General Ewens commanded. He seemed astounded, and at last made me understand him. I told him no, and went on. I afterwards got quite familiar with the Ewens and Weens vernacular of brown jeans. While passing a hospital on the roadside, I happened to see one of our company lying by a tent wounded. I went out to see him, and there found the brigade hospital established. There were heaps of wounded lying about. Many of them I knew, and first one, then another, would ask me to give him water, or do some other favor for him. While thus occupied, Dr. Pendleton told me to stay with him, that I was not able to go on the field, that I would be captured. There was no one to help him, and I turned surgeon, pro tempore. I was not able to do much, but rendered all the assistance in my power. Part of my business was to put patients under the influence of chloroform. I kept my handkerchief saturated all the time, and was often dizzy from the effects of it myself. It was about 1 o'clock in the day when I got there. All day long the battle raged. Occasionally there would be a lull for a short time, but the cannon were never entirely hushed. They would break out in increased thunder, and the roar of musketry would roll up and down the lines, vibrating almost regularly from one extreme to the other. All day long the ambulances continued to discharge their loads of wounded. At last night set in, and the musketry ceased, but the Federal gunboats continued shelling a while after dark. Nearly midnight when we got through with the wounded. A heavy rain set in. I was tired, sick, and all covered with blood, but I was in far better fix than many that were there. I sat on a medicine chest in the surgeon's tent and nodded the long night through. April 7th. With the dawn came the roar of battle, but the combat did not wax very warm until later in the day. Early, all the wounded that could walk were given passes to go to the rear, and those not able to walk were placed in wagons and started for Corinth. Many poor fellows were not able to be moved at all. Once that morning a body of Federal cavalry came close enough to fire on us, tearing up the tents, but fortunately hurting no one. Dr. Pendleton and I were standing close together talking, when a ball passed between our noses, which instantly stopped our conversation. We soon hung up strips of red flannel to prevent further accidents of the kind. A little after the middle of the day the battle raged terribly. It was the last struggle of the Confederates, ending in defeat. Soon after, I saw General Beauregard, accompanied by one or two of his staff, ride leisurely back to the rear, as cool and unperturbed as if nothing had happened. A line was being formed in the rear of us, and we had to move. James Bemis and I put the only remaining wounded of our regiment who could be moved into a large spring wagon and started back. We had to leave some that it would have been death to put them in wagons. We hated to do so, but we could not do otherwise. The wagon was heavy, the horses were balky, and the roads were rough and muddy. Besides, the driver was inexperienced. All combined, we came near not getting out. Bemis was strong and would tug at the wheels. I would plan, abuse the driver, and try to cheer up the horses. At last, we came up with Brother Joseph, who was slightly wounded, and he assisted us. I believe if it had not been for him, we never would have gotten out. Night overtook us before we got far, and we drove off to the side of the road to wait till morning. The rain commenced pouring down and continued all night. The road was in a perfect slush, and the shattered columns were plodding over it all night. As luck would have it, a tent fly was in the wagon, and we cut boughs and stretched it over the wagon bed. I crept in, and with my feet propped up across Adjutant Bell, managed to sleep a little. April 8th. Still raining a while in the morning. On starting, we came to a little branch across the road, in which were sticking fast in the mud several pieces of artillery. We knew we could not cross, and had to cut out a new road through the bushes. All of the army and wagons had now passed by us, save our brigade, which was covering the retreat. We got a mile or two, but at last got stuck in the mud and immovable. I went off to a camp nearby to see if I could not get assistance. The camp was deserted. Went on a little further, hoping to find some loose horse or mule, but wearied and came back. While gone, our quartermaster had come up and put new horses in the wagon. They were in camp, eating breakfast, hardtack and bacon, being plentiful. On setting out, I mounted one of the old horses, barebacked, and with an old rope for a bridle. I looked quixotic then indeed, and felt worse than the original after his fight with the windmills. We got within 6 miles of Corinth that night. Our quartermaster, who was a doctor by profession, dressed all the wounds. I slept in a corn crib that night. Brother Joseph had gone on to Corinth. The day ended clear and warm. This concludes the second part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more stories and leave a comment.